Lord have mercy, sometimes it just comes back to me all of a sudden, like a smell on the breeze. Just this morning, I was sittin' by the window with my tea chamomile, with a little honey like I always take it, and the rain started fallin' on that old tin roof. Soft at first, then faster, and the sound, oh child, that sound brought me right back. Back to that red clay road out by our house, where the water used to come running down like a river every time the clouds opened up. I could almost feel the mud between my toes again. Funny how something as simple as a rainy day can reach down and tug at a memory you thought was packed away for good. I hadn't thought about that morning in a long while, the one when I stood on the porch in my faded dress, holding a little sack of flour over my shoulder like it was a school bag, and watched all the other kids run past me, their shoes kicking up gravel. Land sakes alive, they looked so proud with those canvas backpacks, like little soldiers marching off to war. And me? I didn't even have paper to write on. Didn't have shoes neither. Just my bare feet and that sack hanging off me like a ghost of a dream. You young folks wouldn't understand, not really. Back in my day, if you had a pair of shoes to wear to school, you were already rich in ways most folks couldn't even imagine. And if they actually fit your feet, well, that was the Lord's favor right there. I remember watching those children disappear down the road, Logan and Jocelyn, and I'll tell you what. I felt like the wind had stopped blowing just for me. Like the whole world paused and whispered, "This ain't gonna be easy, Ruth." And Lord knows it wasn't. But I kept walking. That's the part one can't seem to shake today. That girl, that little barefoot girl with a flour sock for a school bag, she's been knocking on my heart all morning. I don't know why. Maybe it's the rain. Maybe it's just that time of life when you start digging through the attic of your mind and finding things you thought you'd buried deep enough. Or maybe it's because I see so many young people now quit things so easy. They've got notebooks and sneakers, tablets and tutors, and they still talk about how hard life is. And I think, child, you wouldn't last a mile in them hills I walked through. I don't say that to be cruel. I say that because I believe you can walk it, but only if someone tells you the truth about how hard the road was and how worth it turned out to be. So today, I want to tell you something. Not for pity, not for pride. Just because it's been stirring in me like an old hymn you hum without even knowing the words anymore. This is the story of how a girl with no shoes, no mother, and no real reason to believe, decided to believe anyway. I ain't never told it all before. Not like this. Not from the start. But today feels like the right day. So lean in a little. Let an old woman take you back to the hills, where the rain smelled like iron, and the world taught you how to keep going even when you had nothing on your feet but faith. I must have been about 6 or 7 when I first started to really see the world around me, not just live in it. It was right after Mama passed. Lord have mercy, she went quiet one evening, just slipped away like a soft wind through the cracks in the wall. I didn't fully understand it then, but I remember her hands always warm, always busy. She used to braid my hair with little pieces of ribbon she tore from old dresses. After she was gone, nobody braided my hair like that again. That was the beginning of time for me. Not the calendar kind, but the soul kind, the kind that shapes who you are before you even know you're being shaped. We lived in a little wooden house nestled between 2 hills, so close to the mountain you could hear it breathe. The roof leaked in 3 spots, the floor creaked under every step, and the windows had more cracks than glass. But it was home. We had 1 pot for stew and a tin bucket for bathin', and somehow it all worked out. Daddy was a coal miner, gone before the sun came up, home long after it set. He didn't say much, not unless it needed saying. But when he put his rough hand on your shoulder, you felt safe, like nothing bad could touch you. I always knew he was tired, but he never once complained. Not even when he'd come home covered in soot and shake out his boots by the door. eyes half closed, body bent like a question mark. I was the fourth of 7. Not the oldest, not the baby. Just one in the middle, learnin' to speak soft and listen hard. We shared everything: food, chores, dreams. And clothes, Lord. We passed clothes down so many times the seams would start tellin' their own stories. My dresses were made from flour sacks, stitched up by my grandma's hands. She had eyes that could still thread a needle by lamplight and a voice that could calm a storm. We ain't got much, she'd say, but we've got each other, and that'll do. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of cornbread and would smoke. We'd take turns with the shoes, since there weren't enough to go round. Whoever rose first got to wear them to school, and honey, I learned to wake up real early. On the days I didn't make it, I'd walk barefoot. The gravel was sharp, the clay was cold, but I never turned back. School was 5 miles down the road one way. Past the store, past the pasture, over the ridge. And the schoolhouse? Just one room, one bell, one blackboard. But to me, it was a palace. I didn't know much then. Just that I liked the sound of pencil on paper and the way Miss Edna said my name like it mattered. Ruth, she'd smile. You've got the kind of mind that wants to fly. And Lord help me, I believed her. I really did. I used to sit by the window, fingers all smudged with lead, staring out past the hills and thinking maybe one day I'd teach too. Maybe I'd have a desk of my own. Back then, I believed that kindness was the most important thing in the world. That people always came back when they said they would. That hard times were just something you walked through, like a patch of thorns on the way to the river. I didn't have much, but I had hope. And even though my belly grumbled and my feet ached and my hands were raw from washing clothes in cold water, I still dreamed. Dreamed big, dreamed loud, dreamed quiet, but always dreamed. And that, I reckon, is what kept me walking all those miles year after year with a flour sack on my back and stars in my eyes. Now, I'll tell you, life in those hills had its own rhythm, its own sort of steady hum. But every once in a while, something would come along and change the tune, like a bird singing a new song just when you thought you knew all the melodies. For me, that something was Miss Edna. I was about 9 years old, walking that dusty road barefoot again, when I first met her, not really met, but noticed her, the way you notice a sudden light in a dark room. She was new to our little schoolhouse, fresh-faced and sharp as a tack, with eyes that looked like they'd seen the world, but still had room for kindness. I remember that day clear as day. It was fall, and the leaves were turning all shades of gold and burnt orange. The air smelled crisp, like the promise of something better just waiting to be found. The other kids barely paid attention, but I caught the way she looked at me. Not like the others who diggle at my bare feet or my flour sack books. No, Miss Edna saw something. And Lord have mercy, that something was enough to make my heart beat a little faster, like a song I'd never heard before but wanted to learn by heart. She pulled me aside one afternoon after school had let out and the sun was dipping low behind the hills. Ruth, she said, her voice soft but steady, you have a mind that's meant for more than these hills. You can be anything you want to be if you don't let this world break you. I didn't know then what all that meant, but the way she said it felt like a secret, one just for me. I tucked those words deep inside my heart, like a precious stone. That same day, I got my first real paper to write on, a few sheets someone donated, clean and crisp, and a pencil, sharpened just right, though the letters on it had worn off long ago. I felt like I was holding the world in my hands. From then on, Miss Edna became more than a teacher. She was a light in the dark, a quiet force that whispered, "You can." I started to believe it. I started to believe in me. And honey, that's no small thing when you've spent your whole life feeling like you were born with a hole in your pocket and not enough to fill it. Around that same time, something else stirred in my young heart. It wasn't love, not yet, but a kind of hope that maybe the world was bigger than those muddy roads and that tiny schoolhouse. I'd watch the older boys play by the creek, their laughter echoing off the rocks, and wonder what it would be like to walk a different path. But Miss Edna's words kept pulling me back to books, back to learning, back to dreaming. I remember thinking, maybe if I learn enough, maybe if I keep walking, I can make it out. That hope was fragile like the wings of a moth, but it was mine. And in those days, that was all a girl like me needed. Life wasn't easy, not by a long shot. The other kids still whispered and stared. The shoes still belonged to someone else. But I carried my dreams like a secret fire, and that fire kept me warm. It's funny how one person, one moment, can turn your whole world around. I can't say why Miss Edna chose me, or why she saw in me what others didn't. But I'm grateful every day she did. Because without that spark, I might never have believed I was worth more than my worn-out shoes and flour sack books. And honey, if there's one thing I want you to know, it's that sometimes, all it takes is one kind word, one quiet faith, to set a whole life on a new course. So here's to Miss Edna, bless her soul, for seeing that barefoot girl and telling her she could fly. Lord, if I close my eyes, I can still see that day like it was yesterday, even though it's been many a year. You know, life has a way of hitting you when you least expect it, sometimes with a whisper, sometimes with a storm. For me, it was the day the shoes ran out, the flour sacks wore thin, and the world felt colder than the mountain wind in January. Daddy came home from the mines with that look, the one where his eyes don't quite meet yours because they're carrying something heavy. Mama had been gone for years by then, but losing her left a shadow over our house that never quite lifted. And now, that shadow felt like it was growing longer, deeper, swallowing up the little bits of hope we'd managed to hold on to. The cold dust on Daddy's hands looked darker than usual, and when he sat down at the table, he didn't say a word, just ran those rough fingers through his thinning hair and stared out the window like he was trying to see a place where things could get better. We didn't have a pot to pee in, as my grandma used to say. The money was thinner than the soles on my shoes, and some days, I wondered if we'd even make it through the week. School started to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. The other kids' laughter turned sharper, their eyes colder when they saw me. Some days they'd ask, "Why do you come if you don't even have real shoes or notebooks?" And I'd bite my tongue because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break their pity into 1,000 pieces. I was scared, sure, scared of what people thought, scared that maybe I wasn't good enough to deserve the dreams Miss Edna planted in me. I felt ashamed, like I was wearing my poverty on my skin for the whole world to see. There was a time when even my own brother told me to stop embarrassing the family by going to school in rags. That hurt worse than any cold wind blowing through the cracks. But I had Miss Edna, bless her heart, she never let me forget that I was worth more than the dirt on my feet. She stood up for me when the others laughed. She gave me those few sheets of paper and that worn pencil like a lifeline thrown across a raging river. Sometimes, I'd sit alone on the porch steps after school, and my thoughts would whirl like a storm. What if I'm just fooling myself? What if I'm meant to be like this forever? I didn't say those things out loud, of course. I kept that fear tucked away where no one could see it. But it gnawed at me like a hungry mouse in the night. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger or the worn-out shoes. It was the silence. The way the world seemed to expect me to just settle for less. To stop dreaming, stop reaching, stop hoping. There were nights when I cried in the dark, not because I was weak, but because I was tired of fighting a battle that didn't seem fair or kind. But here's the thing about a girl who's walked barefoot through red clay roads. You learn to keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how heavy the load. I told myself, Ruth, this ain't the end of your story. It's just a hard chapter. And slowly, ever so slowly, that the leaf began to grow. I learned that sometimes the fiercest battles you fight are the ones inside your own heart. And sometimes the people who seem against you the most are just scared. Scared that you'll be different. Scared that you'll break the mold they've set. But I was determined. For me, for my siblings, for the little girl who had no shoes but a whole world of dreams. I clung to the promise Miss Edna made that I could be anybody if I didn't give up. And that promise kept me going when nothing else did. So yeah, those were hard days. Days when fear and shame and doubt tried to pull me under. But they also taught me that strength ain't about how fancy your shoes are. It's about how steady your heart beats when the road gets rough. And child, if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's that. Because sometimes the hardest roads lead to the brightest places, and sometimes the most worn-out feet carry the strongest souls. Land sakes alive. I can still see it all clear as a mountain spring, even though it's been decades since that day. I remember how the clock on the wall in our little house seemed to stop ticking, like time itself held its breath, waiting for something it couldn't quite understand. It was the day Daddy didn't come home from the mines. You see, in those days, the mines were both lifeline and danger, a place where men went in every morning, not knowing if they'd see the sunset. That morning, he kissed each of us goodbye, his hands rough but steady, and promised he'd be back with a pocket full of coal to keep us warm through the winter. But that night, when the fire in the hearth was low and the shadows grew long, he wasn't there. I remember the knock at the door. I was sitting by the window, finishing my schoolwork on scraps of paper, when Mrs. Jenkins from down the road stood there, her eyes full of sorrow and fear. "Ruth," she said softly, "there's been an accident. Your daddy." Her voice cracked, and that's when I knew the world had changed. I can't even put into words how it felt. Like the ground beneath me gave way, and I was fallen, but no one caught me. I was angry, Lord. Was I angry? Angry at the mines, angry at the sky, angry at myself for not being able to do anything. And scared, so scared I thought my heart might stop altogether. My brothers and sisters cried, and my grandma held us close, whispering prayers through her tears. But I sat there numb. The man who had held me safe with those rough hands, who worked so hard to keep us fed, was gone. Just like that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence that filled the house where Daddy's voice used to be. It was like a wound that wouldn't heal, a question with no answer. I thought about my dreams about school, about teaching, and wondered if they meant anything without him here to see them. For a long time, I felt lost. I wanted to give up, to put on those worn-out shoes and walk away from everything. But then I remembered Miss Edna's words, the promise she made when no one else believed in me. "You can be anybody," she said, "if you don't let this world break you." And I realized, right then, that losing Daddy didn't mean losing the fight. It meant I had to fight harder. For him, for Mama, for the little ones who look to me now for strength. That moment changed me. It carved a new path in my heart, one paved with grief, but also with determination. I learned that sorrow doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a new chapter. The kind of chapter that takes all your broken pieces and turns them into something stronger than before. I didn't know then how I'd do it, but I knew I had to. I had to keep walking those miles barefoot, keep clutching that flour sack, keep believing in dreams that seemed too big for a girl like me. Because giving up would have been the real loss. And I wasn't ready to lose. Not yet. So, yes, that day changed everything. It broke my heart wide open and taught me how to hold the pieces together with hands that refused to quit. And every step I've taken since, I've carried that lesson with me, that even in the darkest storms, there's a way forward. You just have to find the courage to take the next step. And Lord, I hope you do too. After Daddy was gone, the world felt quieter, like someone had turned down the volume on life. The house was still full of folks, 7 children and 2 old souls trying to hold it all together, but the laughter wasn't the same. It was softer, slower, more careful, like we were all trying not to wake a sleeping bear. I reckon the hardest part wasn't just losing Daddy. It was living in the silence he left behind. I felt like a shadow of the girl I used to be, wandering through days that stretched out long and empty. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, watching the rain fall on that old red clay road, and wonder if the sun would ever feel warm again. The dreams I held so tight began to feel like distant stars, shining but far away. I wasn't sure if I still belonged in that world of books and learning, or if I was meant to just keep walking those hills with bare feet and a heavy heart. My faith, well, it was there, but it felt like a whisper in a storm. I'd pray, but the words came slow and unsure. I didn't feel the way I used to, like the Lord was holding my hand through every step. Instead, I felt lost, like a small boat adrift on a dark sea. Sometimes I'd think, did he forget me? Or why would he take Daddy away? Those questions rattled around in my mind, heavy and unanswerable. Yet somehow, even in that emptiness, there was a kind of strange peace. A quiet that told me to just be still, to breathe, to feel the sadness without letting it swallow me whole. I learned that grief isn't just a storm you survive. It's a river you have to learn to float on, sometimes sinking, sometimes bobbing back up to the surface. My brothers and sisters needed me more than ever, and I found small ways to hold us together. I cooked what little we had, patched up torn clothes, and held babies who cried for a mother they barely knew. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to see that even broken things can still shine. The world around me had changed, sure. The hills looked the same, but I felt different, older, wiser, but also lonelier. I wasn't the carefree child who dreamed beneath the big Appalachian sky anymore. I was someone who carried the weight of loss in her bones, who had learned that life can be both beautiful and cruel all at once. It was in that silence, in that stillness after the storm, that I began to understand something important. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'm still here. And maybe that's what I was, a quiet strength, small but steady, like the roots of an old tree holding fast beneath the soil. I didn't know what the future held, and I couldn't see the path ahead clearly. But I knew I had to keep moving, keep trying, even if it was one small step at a time. Because that's how we heal. That's how we live. And Lord, even in the darkest silence, I started to believe again, maybe not in the way I once did, but in a new way. A way that didn't promise easy answers, but offered a hand to hold through the night. So I sat there, watching the rain, feeling the cold seep in, but knowing somehow, deep down, that the sun would shine again. Just maybe, it'd take a little longer to get here. You know, sometimes in life, the smallest things can change everything. After those long days filled with quiet sorrow and heavy hearts, something unexpected came along and gave me a new reason to keep on keeping on. It wasn't a grand event or a sudden miracle, no, it was more like a soft knock on a closed door, just enough to make me turn around and see that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. It was the day I got the letter. I can still remember holding that thin envelope in my hands, my fingers trembling just a bit. The handwriting was neat, from a school way beyond our hills, a place I'd only dreamed of but never thought I'd reach. The letter said I'd been awarded a scholarship to continue my education, to step out beyond the dirt roads and flour sacks and into a bigger world. Lord have mercy, I read those words over and over like a prayer. I wasn't sure if it was real at first. A girl like me, from a place where shoes were shared and dreams were thin, given a chance like that, it felt like a blessing too big for my heart to hold. But with that blessing came a flicker of hope, a gentle light that warmed the cold corners of my soul. For the first time in a long time, I believed I could be more than the circumstances I'd been born into. And honey, that hope was enough to get me moving. It wasn't easy. I was scared. Leaving the only home I'd ever known felt like leaving a part of myself behind. But I knew I had to try. For me, for my siblings, for the little girl who once walked barefoot to school with nothing but a sack of flour on her back. That letter was my second chance, a chance to change the story, to make those miles mean something, more than just pain and struggle. When I told Grandma and the others, their faces lit up with tears and pride. They were scared too, but they never said no. They said, "Go on now, Ruth. Show the world what you're made of." So I packed my few things, said my goodbyes, and set out on a journey that would take me far from the hills, but never far from my heart. Along the way, I kept a little journal, scribbled notes and prayers, thoughts about the world and who I wanted to be. I started to see that education wasn't just about books or tests. It was about finding your voice and learning how to use it to stand tall even when the world tries to push you down. I found new friends, teachers who believed in me, and a place where my dreams didn't feel so out of reach. And when I helped others, a younger student struggling with her lessons, a neighbor in need, I felt that old fire spark back to life inside me. I realized that giving back was part of the journey, part of what made the hard times worth it. The road wasn't smooth, no ma'am. There were days I wanted to give up, to go back to the hills and the quiet safety of what I knew. But that little light kept shining steady and true, reminding me that sometimes all it takes is one step to change your whole path. So here's the truth I learned. No matter how dark the night, no matter how heavy the burden, there's always a chance for a new beginning. A second chance to rise, to grow, to dream again. And Lord, I hope that if you're listening, you'll find your little light too. Because once it starts to shine, it can lead you home, even if home's a place you've never been before. Land sakes alive, it wasn't easy to get to this place, the one where I could finally say to myself, "Ruth, it's okay. It's all okay." For so long, I carried the weight of those early years like a heavy cloak, the loss, the hunger, the shame. They clung to me like shadows at dusk, following my every step. I thought maybe they'd never let me be free. I held on to hurt and regret, as if letting go meant forgetting those I loved or the girl I once was. But one day, something inside me shifted. I don't know if it was the gentle breath of a spring morning or a prayer answered in the quiet of my heart, but I realized that my past, with all its pain and struggle, didn't have to define my future. I remember standing on the porch of my little home, the sun just starting to peek over the hills, and feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. In my hand, I held that old flour sack I'd carried to school so many times, worn thin and patched with love. And then I did something I'd been too scared to do before. I let it go. I threw it down by the garden, not because I forgot what it meant, but because I was ready to stop carrying it like a burden. That sack was a symbol of everything I'd been through, but it wasn't who I was anymore. I chose to live beyond those days, not by forgetting, but by forgiving. Forgiving myself for the times I doubted, for the moments I felt less than worthy. Forgiving the world for its hardships, even when they felt unfair. And most importantly, forgiving Daddy and Mama, because their absence didn't mean the end of love. That choice wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a river carving new paths through old stones. It came after tears, after nights spent wrestling with memories that wouldn't rest. But when it came, it brought peace. I told myself, I'll live without regrets, without bitterness. I'll live with the hope that tomorrow holds something better. And you know, that decision changed everything. It gave me strength to keep teaching, keep giving, keep dreaming. It helped me see that the girl who walked barefoot wasn't lost, She was simply growing. I started letting the past be what it was, a part of my story, not the whole book. That freed me to love harder, to laugh louder, and to walk taller. I learned that acceptance isn't about giving up. It's about standing firm in the face of pain, in the light of hope, and in the grace of what's yet to come. So, if you're listening and you're carrying your own burdens, I want you to know this. It's all right to let go. It's all right to say, I choose to live again. Because that's where the healing begins. That's where the road leads home. And I'm walking that road with open hands and an open heart, ready for whatever comes next. You know, after all these years, I've come to understand something deep, something that wasn't clear when I was a young girl walking barefoot through those Appalachian hills. It's not about how much you have or what you started with. It's about what you carry inside and how you choose to carry it. Back then, I thought the lack of shoes, the worn clothes, the hunger, that was my whole story. But now I see it was just the beginning of the story. Life doesn't hand out equal parts to everyone, and that's a truth that's hard to swallow. But what you do with the parts you get, that's what makes all the difference. I learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you do. It's about walking those red clay roads even when your feet bleed, and finding the grace to keep moving forward. I also learned that dreams are weightless. You don't need fancy shoes or thick notebooks to carry them. A dream fits in the smallest pocket of your heart, and it's yours to keep no matter what. Maybe the greatest lesson I've come to hold is that kindness, true kindness, is the currency that never runs dry. Even when the world seemed hard and cold, it was the gentle hands of my grandma, the soft words of Miss Edna, and the quiet faith of my family that kept me going. Those moments of love and grace are what built me up when everything else was falling apart. So, if there's one thing I hope folks take away from my story, it's this. Don't wait for perfect conditions to start living. Don't wait until you have everything figured out, or until the road looks easy. Sometimes, the hardest roads teach the best lessons. And sometimes, the ones who seem least likely to succeed are the ones who teach us what true courage looks like. You young folks, listen here. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for the right moment. Maybe it's time to stop letting fear and doubt hold you back. Maybe it's time to put one foot in front of the other, no matter what's on your feet or in your hands. The world might not always be kind, but you can be. You can choose to be the light in someone's dark day. You can choose to keep dreaming, even when it feels like the whole world's against you. That's how I made it through. And that's how I learned that life, with all its twists and turns, its joys and sorrows, is a gift to be walked with an open heart and steady step. So, maybe you'll take this old woman's words and carry them with you. Maybe you'll find a little courage to chase your own dreams, no matter how barefoot or broken the path seems. Because that's the truth I've come to live by. It's not about where you start, but how you choose to keep walking. And honey, I'm still walking. Well now, honey, as I sit here and think about all these years, all these miles walked barefoot, and all those dreams held tight, I find myself wondering about something more than just my story. I find myself wondering about yours, about the hearts out there listening to this old woman's tale, carrying their own memories and hopes. You see, this story I told you today, it ain't just about the hills I grew up in or the flour sacks I carried to school. It's about something that lives in all of us, the hope that what we love, what we dream, what we hold dear, somehow finds its way back to us. Sometimes I ask myself, is true love really supposed to come back? Not just the kind you think about on Valentine's Day, but the kind of love that sticks with you through all the hard times, the kind of love that doesn't fade even when the years pile up and life takes unexpected turns. I reckon that's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves. Because love, real love, ain't always easy to understand. It's messy and complicated, just like life. but it's also the thing that makes the journey worth talking. I don't mean just romantic love, mind you. I mean love for family, for dreams, for the places that shaped us, for the people who held our hands when the world tried to let go. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think that love never really leaves us. It's like a quiet song that plays in the background of our lives, reminding us who we are and where we come from. Maybe that's why this story still lives in my heart, because it's not just about the past. It's about today and tomorrow and all the days that still lie ahead for you and me. It's about the footprints we leave behind, even when we think no one's watching. It's about the hope that no matter where life takes us, we can find our way home. And I want you to know, from one heart to another, that whatever you're carrying right now, whether it's a dream, a fear, a memory, or a prayer, you're not alone. We're all walking our own roads, barefoot or booted, through sunshine and rain. And if you listen close, you might just hear that quiet song I'm talking about. So, I'll leave you with this question, one that's been sitting with me lately. Do you think true love is supposed to come back? Think on that for a while. Maybe talk to someone about it. Maybe just hold it close like a secret. And sometimes, when the world is still and the night is quiet, maybe you'll feel it too, that soft, gentle pull of something that remembers you, just like I remember the hills I came from. Sometimes, I swear, I can feel Daddy's hand on my shoulder, steady and warm like it was never really gone. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep walking. Thank you for listening, for holding my story in your heart. I hope it brings you a little peace, a little courage, and a whole lot of hope. Because that's what life's really about, keeping that hope alive, no matter what's on your feet.